Yo, it's good. It's kind of, while most modern relationships doomed to failure now, a majority of people that are out here are damaged. They have been betrayed. And betrayal, it changes you. It changes you fundamentally. It changes you pathologically. You'll never be the same, no matter how you try to convince yourself. When you've been deeply betrayed, and we're not talking about, you know, surface value, someone you had a bond with, you know, and betrayal doesn't always have to be, in the most dramatic form. It doesn't even have to be infidelity. Betrayal can come in so many different forms. And but what it really is a betrayal of your ideology of what you expect out of that other person. And once that happens, that's the end of the relationship, fundamentally. The relationship may last however long, but you'll be in a relationship with yourself, because obviously once the trust is gone, the respect will follow soon after. And at that point, the relationship is, for all intents and purposes, is finished. It'll just be a series of, you know, actions and reactions, emotions and emotional responses until, it burns itself out like a wildfire or whatever. But it changes you. And moving forward, and I'm pretty sure that, anybody that's been in any type of relationship, whether it was a serious relationship or what, but once you start to, and for empaths, people who are more in tune with, others, other people's emotional and mental state and well-being, because everybody is not empathetic out here. Most people by nature just see things from their perspective. They really only can, relate to their own agenda, their own feelings and thoughts. That's something that it took me a while to figure out. That's why people that are close to you can do certain things that will leave you speechless, confused, you know. It's because most people just do not feel on a level, beyond their own personal. You understand what I'm saying? That's not normal. It's not. So empaths, y'all have it the worst, you know. But once somebody, is betrayed, you develop these different mechanisms, coping mechanisms, you know. You tell yourself that, it wasn't really that serious, that you seen it coming, you know. And their lies. These are things that, you will machinate. It's self-defense mechanism. Because at that point, when somebody has betrayed you and deeply hurt you, it's all about survival at that point. So you tell yourself you didn't really care about that person as much as you thought anyway. You didn't really love that person. It was just a thing. It was just a vibe. but it's a lie, So nobody ever forgets betrayal, ever, you know. And I'm not talking about, you know, like I said, trivial. Who's to quantify what betrayal is? But if you've been betrayed on a level that left you like feeling empty, because when somebody you care about moves a certain way, man, and that's therein lies the problem. People tend to think that if you, and I think it's just human nature, man. You love someone, or you think you feel like you love someone. You expect that they are reciprocating that, right? You expect that they value that love. And that's where people make, that's the error. Because most people, tend to quantify love as the most, you know, if you express love to somebody and that's the highest form of emotional currency, you know. And when other people don't value that, man, it could crush your soul to the core, because it's like the average person feel like that is the most they can offer somebody else. Not monetary things, you know. So when that's taken for granted, obviously, needless to say, that could leave you devastated. So moving forward, man, you will always, any relationship you in, you're always going to expect, you know, you're always going to be waiting for that knife in the back. So you become one or two people, man. The type of person who is on guard at all times, even if you start to care about this person, especially if you start to care about this person, you'll see ghosts. You'll start to see things that aren't there, interpret certain lines of dialogue or misinterpret them because you are trying to read between the lines. Like I said, looking for things that aren't there. Maybe they are, but usually they aren't, because now you're in your own head, or you become the type of person that just overlooks everything. You become blind to that type of shit. You don't even want to, you know what I'm saying? Willfully oblivious. Because ignorance is bliss. If you know no better, you can live in this delusion that, everything is perfectly fine, even when there are obvious signs that will be obvious to anybody who got their antennas up. A lot of people rather live in that prism. The late night calls or text, or, the switch up in the schedule, and that signs. But you ignore those signs because you'd rather stay in that, that blissful state of ignorance than face the painful truth that you are dealing with somebody that is a betrayer, especially if you love that individual. But I think, I couldn't exist in a prison where I'm betraying myself. And that's what betrayal will do. It will make you into the betrayer at some point, depending on what type of person you are. You become cold. You become numb to feelings. You become self-serving, and you become the betrayer before they can betray you. So I think people get in and out of relationships and they downplay the damage, that they have experienced in these different relationships, and you jump on to the next relationship and pretend like you starting fresh. I wonder how many relationships I have destroyed just because, you know, things that I perceive to be, untrustworthy behaviors or certain signs that I may have read into that weren't even there because that's what I was looking for. That's what I expect, because like I said, and anyone who come across this will certainly agree. You never forget betrayal. I've suffered injuries that, I've had to go receive, minor surgery for. I cannot tell you how I received those injuries. I see the scars, almost daily. And it's like, you know, I cannot tell you how I received those injuries though. Because in life, we suffer bumps and bruises. Like that's all a part of. But betrayal, I remember every betrayal, starting from the time I had a sense of self-consciousness, and I understood, before I knew what betrayal was. But I remember every instance, and I can almost recall the very, you know, the exact emotional response to those betrayals in every instance, different forms of emotional response. In other words, my response and how that shit left me, you know. So, what is the solution? You either decide, live in solitude, or if you are dealing with people, you're only going to give them so much of yourself, right? But never, never going to give them your all. Never going to put your total and complete trust in them. Because you know what the risk of that is. Because you've been down that road. So we enter into these relationships moving forward, offering a shell of ourselves, a fraction of ourselves, and vice versa on both ends, because usually coming into these things, both parties have experienced some form of betrayal in one way or another. And so the relationship is never at full capacity. It's never going to receive the type of, spiritual and emotional nourishment that it needs to actually become a healthy relationship. It's a shell of a relationship, a ghost of a relationship. And people who have been been betrayed on a deep level, they become a shell of them emotional selves. And some people just check out emotionally altogether. And they just seek whatever form of gratification or whatever agenda that they have. Uh, they use that other person to, fulfill that objective. And there's never any emotional attachment at all. And that's why you can be with somebody for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and find out things about them that you never knew was a part of their characteristics or their makeup, and it take you totally by surprise, but it really shouldn't have, because you already knew. And that's the worst form of betrayal, is when you betray yourself. Either when you lie to yourself and you tell yourself that, these signs that you know to be, signifiers that you're dealing with somebody who is not trustworthy, somebody who is ultimately going to be a betrayer, you ignore those signs. Because not knowing the truth, you can move past day-to-day life and that. But the other way you betray yourself is, like I said, you never, ever allow anybody to get past those walls. You build them walls so high, nothing could ever escape or get past them. So obviously, that means you yourself are trapped, So, betrayal. We've all been betrayed. Jesus Christ himself was betrayed by one of his most trusted, and so he thought, loyalists. But the thing is, unlike Jesus, most of us will not see it coming. But it's not the betrayal, man. It's your response to the betrayal that's really going to, because it's a strong, optimistic person who can, experience, like I said, a deep level of betrayal and still moving forward, leave themselves open and vulnerable and still willing to give, That's a strong person indeed, because the average person, the first time you are betrayed, it will change you fundamentally, like moving forward. That's indefinite, 216 Scano, you already know.